Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America is on the guest line. Larry, welcome back to the Steve Deace Show, sir. How are you?
Well, it's good to be with you from the stable of guest misfits.
It's good to have you on, and it's good to hear your voice again. And we keep hearing this term, gun show loophole. I want to get to that in a little bit, but Loretta Lynch unleashed. What is the U.S. Attorney General up to now?
Well, best take I can share with you, Loretta Lynch is trying to accomplish that which has frustrated our president the very most. He said not too long ago that his greatest lament, my words, not his, but I think I'm accurate, paraphrasing, my greatest lament is that I have been unable to move the agenda on guns. And so Loretta Lynch is looking for ways that the administration can get away with. And I think that may be the best choice of words, not ways that are available to them, because there are no ways available to them to do what they say they're trying to do, which is to change the law about who is a dealer of firearms in this country. The law is actually rather specific. Federal law isn't always that way, but in this case it is because of abuses of the federal government in the past. There was a reform in the 80s, and as a result of it, legislation was enacted that said that in order for someone to be a dealer, they had to be trying, not succeeding, trying to make a living from the sale of firearms. So if I were to inherit my Uncle Harry's 8 guns and decide either I don't like guns or I've got enough guns or I need the money, it doesn't matter. If I decide I want to go sell them at a gun show or at any other place where there's a private buyer, I can do that. I don't have to become a licensed firearms dealer. The president is trying to compel sales of that sort to fall under the requirements of being transacted by a federally licensed firearms dealer. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, they say so they can do a background check. Well, please. The administration that has provided guns to the Mexican cartels, in fact, just recently now we've learned that a 50 caliber rifle, which is a really big gun,
right,
was found in the personal possession of El Chapo Guzman, the one of the head hyenas of the Mexican cartels, who was recently captured by his own stupid desire for fame and notoriety, and it caught up and bit him. But that's another story. The fact of the matter is our government was providing wholesale firearms to the Mexican cartels, and then they turn around through Loretta Lynch, through the president, and say, well, we can't be sure about that neighbor you're selling the revolver to. We've got to do a background check on that neighbor that's lived next door to you for 5 years. Give me a break. When you punish somebody for having been involved in Operation Fast and Furious, which sold all those guns to the Mexican cartel, and which resulted in at least 2,000 people being murdered using guns our government made sure they got, then maybe we can talk about some other aspects. But until then, I think we're talking about crocodile tears.
Like you said, I mean, his lament, and I think that is an appropriate way to put it. He has tried and tried and tried to push the issue on gun control and has been unable to. And we hear all these terms bandied about, like gun show loophole. In fact, today there was a report about Maryland senator blaming Baltimore's ridiculously high gun violence rate on this gun show loophole. And I've heard a few things about a potential national registry for firearms, and some people may say, hey, that doesn't sound too bad. It's just a registry. How dangerous could that be? Well, how dangerous could that be to lovers of our Second Amendment rights?
Well, first of all, let's ask, what would be the expected benefit from a registry. Let's get to the Constitution in a bit. But what would be the benefit if we're supposed to not even ask about the Constitution? Surely there must be some big benefit for public safety that would flow from a registry. Well, the Canadians have had decades and decades of experience with registering firearms. At first, handguns, and maybe a decade or two ago, they got involved in registering long guns, and they decided this is such a loser that when the conservative government of Harper came in, just recently replaced by a socialist government, but when that government came in, they actually fulfilled a campaign promise and got rid of the long gun registry. That's how unpopular and how useless gun registry was in Canada. Now, if our liberal neighbors to the north decided to reject a registry of guns and the party that put it into place, maybe we could come to the conclusion that it's not such a good idea. In our own experience, we do a background check of all sales through federally licensed firearms dealers. In the about a year, the year before the last year of record, some 11 million firearms were sold. It's actually 23 million last year. But in that year of 11 million sales, there were 14 prosecutions under that instant background check law, where people had apparently lied about their backgrounds and were significantly criminal. They had a significantly criminal background that they ended up getting prosecuted. And I'm not even sure those prosecutions, all of them resulted in convictions. So that's we're talking about something that really is not a big tool for fighting crime. And yet millions of dollars are spent, and even though the law says they can only keep those names and addresses of those that have their background checked for 24 hours, does anybody believe that the government that would abuse the IRS and use it as a cudgel against its political opponents, that would use the NSA to make wholesale data collection of telephone calls being made in the United States against federal law without a warrant, that they would also obey scrupulously the requirement that they only keep that data obtained from the background checks for 24 hours? Indeed, they kind of let the cat out of the bag a year or two ago when they gave a grant to a study to be made, what they called a longitudinal study. In other words, over time, they wanted to see what was happening to the people who had their backgrounds checked. Well, golly, if you're going to do a study over time, tells me that probably that over time means more than 24 hours, eh?
Right. We're talking with Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America on the line, talking about the Obama administration's most recent attempts to try to roll back and try to control our Second Amendment rights. We'll continue on with Larry after the break. You're listening to the Steve Deace Show on the Salem Radio Network, powered by Conservative Review. Steve, of course, is out. I'm Aaron McIntyre, his producer, in for him, as I think I just said, along with Todd Erzin, Steve, his web editor as well. We'll be back after the break.
You're listening to Steve Deace.
I like you.
The Swamp, the Steve Deace Show.
And welcome back to the Steve Deace Show. Aaron McIntyre, Steve's producer, filling in, along with Todd Erzin, Steve's web editor. On the guest line right now is Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America. And Larry, all this from the constant condescension from the president telling us we need more gun control, the stuff like what you're talking about with Loretta Lynch, from your view, is there anything that they can do to turn the tide of public opinion on the Second Amendment?
Well, they might be able to convince people that they're no longer hypocrites. They might tell their Secret Service guards, who are truly legion, guys and gals, please, when you come to work, no more guns. Just leave them at home. Actually, if they're government issue, we'll take them back. You're not going to need them anymore. The president has decided that he's going to be consistent with his view that the average citizen doesn't need a gun for protection, and therefore, since this is America and we don't have special classes of people, the president shouldn't have people around him with guns either.
Larry, I want to share, this is Todd, I want to share a couple anecdotes I learned during my time as a reporter with the Des Moines Register, talking with fellow reporters, and just hear you reflect on them. One of them confided in me, a guy I like very much, but he said if he's sitting in a coffee shop or something and a cop happens to walk in to get a coffee, he's just made nervous by the mere presence of guns. And another reporter, we were going back and forth on the merits of various issues, concealed carry, background checks, things of that nature. And I kept pushing on those issues. And finally, he was just blatantly honest, and he blurted it out. He said, "Why do gun owners love their guns so much?" And both of those just reflect that at its core, to so many of these people, these are just people who are incredibly uncomfortable with guns and or disdainful of the people who own them. And everything else that they're arguing for is some kind of cover on that front. Am I in the ballpark of your experience, since you're on the front lines of this?
Yeah, I would say there's probably two levels of ways to answer. One is the person that you're talking about, or the persons, have almost certainly never fired a gun. May not have even been around when somebody else was firing a gun. And it might be very helpful to take them to a shooting range. Don't try to start them off with a .45 pistol. Start them off with a .22 target pistol, for that matter, and put the target within some reasonably close distance, and let them fire once and see, by golly, I put a hole in the paper. And maybe if they really try a little harder and overcome their inherent fear, they might actually start putting holes fairly close to the center of the paper, otherwise known as the bull. And that's no bull. And so I think that would be one way. And it has been used by people over the years to allay the fears of those who simply didn't have any actual experience with firearms. And when they realize that when properly handled, the gun is certainly no more dangerous than the automobile that they drive, probably without thinking that car, generically, cars kill more people than guns every year in our country. So that might be a step that could be taken, and it often has actually been a successful way to get people to relax. And then I would suggest, once they've begun to even hopefully enjoy firing one or more guns at a range, then engage them a little bit in the other question that they raise about why is there such a fondness for guns. Well, part of it, I think, is that some guys, not yours truly, have a mechanical inclination, and they really get into the way a gun functions, and they like to tinker with them and even soup them up a little bit and all of that kind of thing. If I have the slightest problem with my guns, I go to a gunsmith. I just don't. It's kind of like what I do with my car. I go to a mechanic. But the reason that Americans traditionally, historically, have had guns is to protect freedom. And that's the reason for the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment most assuredly is not to protect the right to shoot a deer or to shoot a piece of paper, although those are collateral benefits, I would argue, but they are not the reason we have a Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution. That amendment is there to make sure that there will always be citizens owning their own firearms, so that if a government begins to go over the edge, the people themselves are able to essentially remind the government that, there really are life and death limits to what you're fixing to do. The most recent example I could point to of how the Second Amendment kept a government within some kind of limits was out in Bunkerville, Nevada, at the ranch of Clive and Bundy. Federal agents of the Bureau of Land Management basically invaded the man's ranch, which his family had ranched cattle, grazed cattle, watered cattle there for about almost 150 years. And all of a sudden, the government starts changing the rules and telling him he can't graze, even though he's got contracts with the federal government to do just that. And so he said, well, you're breaking the law. You're breaking the terms of our agreement. Nuts to you. And so he and his rather large family began to keep guard to make sure that the feds didn't come and take away the cattle. Turned out that they weren't going to take away the cattle. They were going to kill about $1 million worth of his cattle had they been able to get their hands on them. But that they didn't learn until the end of the standoff. The standoff that resulted was aided on a daily basis by people coming from increasingly far away, ultimately all over the country, to help the Bundy family stand up against the federal government. And in the end, on a Saturday morning, fairly early, very early for me, about 7:30, that's the one day I get to sometimes sleep in, they were gone. They just packed up and left because they realized that even though the federal government has the means to prevail in a situation like that, they realized that would have probably been the beginning of something way out of control, and they didn't want to even think about that. And so the Second Amendment prevailed. It brought a potentially tyrannical government back to reason, back under control, back under the limits of the Constitution.
We've been talking with Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America. Larry Pratt, thank you so much for your time. Where can people learn more about Gun Owners of America?
Well, thanks. Go to gunowners.org, sign up for our free legislative alerts, and that way you'll be able to do what Senator Dirksen was so fond of saying years ago with his cigarette-stained voice, when I feel the heat, I see the light.
Very good. Very nice. Larry Pratt, thank you so much for your time.
All right. God bless you all. Thank you.
Have a good one.